It was my daughter's wedding day, and while everyone was glowing with joy, I stood silently near the back of the room, hidden behind a tall arrangement of lilies and roses. I wasn't placed there by accident. "Put her behind the flowers," I heard someone whisper. "She doesn't look great in photos." No one looked at me twice. My daughter barely met my eyes, and when she did, she only said, "At least you're decent today." I smiled. But behind that smile, there was something no one could see. Not even her, especially not her husband. You see, I am 72, a widow. I don't talk much, and I've never been the type to cause a scene. I've been called polite, discreet, even invisible, and that's fine. I've learned that quiet people get underestimated, especially older women, especially mothers who spent their lives serving others. They think we don't notice things. They think we're tired, confused, maybe even delusional. But what they don't know is that silence doesn't mean blindness. Sometimes, silence is the beginning of a storm. The day of the wedding wasn't the first time I'd felt small. It wasn't even the worst. But there was something about that moment, being tucked away like a misplaced decoration, that pierced deeper than usual. I had carried this child in my womb, raised her through nights of fever, heartbreak, and exams. I gave up everything for her. And now, I was just the old lady ruining the aesthetic. I whispered to myself, "Smile." Not yet, because deep down, I knew what they didn't. I wasn't there just to watch them marry. I was there to end the show. My daughter had changed. Or maybe I had refused to see who she truly was all along. Since her engagement, she started treating me like a fragile vase, decorative, breakable, and useless. Her fiancé was worse, always polite on the surface, but behind the eyes, disgust. He'd say things like, "We'll take care of her," or, "Don't worry, she won't be alone for long," as if I was already halfway gone. But I was more present than ever, watching, listening, collecting. The world is cruel to old women. They make you feel like a burden, like your presence is a stain on the joy of the young. They forget that age doesn't erase memory or wisdom. They think we sit in silence because we're too tired to speak. But sometimes, silence is strategy. I didn't speak because I didn't want to scare them. Yet, I had spent the last 2 years preparing, quietly, methodically. Every time he slipped up, I took note. Every fake smile, every calculated compliment. I watched him try to wedge distance between me and my daughter. "She's just overwhelmed," he'd say, when she forgot my birthday. "She needs space," when she stopped calling. I knew those tricks. My husband had once warned me, if someone wants to isolate you, they're planning to take something. They thought I was just grieving, that after losing my husband, I'd lost my grip on reality too. And for a while, maybe I had. Grief is strange. It makes everything blurry. But once the fog lifted, I saw everything clearly, including them, especially him. I started to trace patterns, the gentle manipulation, the paperwork he kept offering. "For your protection," he said, always so helpful, always so rehearsed. That wedding day, it was their celebration, but it was also my signal. While they toasted champagne, I was toasting my final draft, a plan I had worked on for months. I had already contacted the right people. I had already found the folder my husband left hidden before he died. I hadn't opened it in years, but I remembered his words. "Only use this when they think they've won," and they thought they had. My daughter had a new life. Her husband had new control. And I was just a senile old woman ruining the backdrop of their wedding photos. But what they didn't know was that my husband had left me everything. Not just money, evidence, names, documents, a roadmap for what to do if someone tried to erase me. So when her husband leaned in and said, "You're lucky we're still letting you live on your own," I smiled wider, not because I was grateful, but because I knew he was going to regret ever thinking I was weak. The wedding was filled with laughter, camera flashes, expensive wine, and rehearsed vows. I stood still, dressed in the same soft blue dress I wore to my niece's wedding 5 years ago. It still fit, not because I hadn't changed, but because the world had. I didn't eat much these days. I didn't smile much, either. Not genuinely. That day, my smile was painted on, cracked and hollow, like porcelain trying to hold in water. A woman leaned near and asked if I was part of the catering staff. I didn't respond. I just moved behind another flower arrangement. Out of view. Out of mind. During the ceremony, someone brought out chairs for the grandparents. Not for her, said the planner. We don't have enough. So I stood. For 47 minutes, I stood with swollen feet in heels that no longer belonged to this body. I watched my daughter walk down the aisle in a custom dress, her arm locked in a stranger's. My heart wanted to be proud, but all I could feel was distance. She didn't look at me. Not once. Like I was a memory she didn't want to recall, a mistake she wanted to cover with silk and lace. After the kiss, there was applause. People clapped for love, for the future. I clapped too, slowly, quietly, like someone clapping for a ghost. Then came the family photos. I stood nearby, waiting to be called. But the photographer moved on. We've got everyone, he said. Everyone. Except the woman who bled for that child, who sold her wedding ring to buy medicine when she was 6, who stayed awake for 3 nights when she had pneumonia. But now, I was everyone else. At the reception, they had a seat for me. Table 17, near the kitchen doors, next to a man who smelled like whiskey and garlic. He talked about golf the whole time, never asked my name, never knew who I was. I stared at the lights strung above us. Beautiful things, pretending to be stars. Would you like some more salad? The server asked. I shook my head. What I wanted was a moment of acknowledgement, a look, a touch, something that said, I remember you. My daughter did her first dance. Her husband held her like something he owned, possessive, polished, the kind of man who knows exactly how to smile in front of others and exactly when to stop. When he twirled her, her eyes caught mine, briefly. I raised my hand, a small wave. She looked away. He noticed, whispered something. She nodded, and that was that. Later that night, I approached her, just for a hug, just to say she looked beautiful. Not now, Mom, she said, annoyed. We're trying to take pictures. Her husband added, she gets tired easily. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was familiar. That kind of dismissal. The way people excuse your existence like you're a misplaced chair. I stepped back, and in that moment, I stopped trying. He came to me later with a drink. We really should talk about your finances sometime, he said softly, with a patronizing smile. You know, just to make sure you're protected. Protected from what? From whom? He never said, but the way he looked at me said everything. I was a loose end, an inconvenience, a woman with too many memories and too much independence, a threat he hadn't fully neutralized. I remember gripping my glass tightly, fingers aching from the cold. Thank you, I said, but I'll manage. He nodded, lips tight. That was the first crack in his performance. He didn't like women who said no, especially old ones, especially ones who watched too closely. They all laughed together at the main table. Toasts were made, promises spoken into microphones. The bride and groom kissed again, and I just sat there, surrounded by people, completely alone. That night wasn't about love. Not really. It was about roles, appearances, control. And they had already written me out of the script, but I had memorized the pages they didn't see. I went home early. No one noticed. No one stopped me. I walked out of that hall like I'd never been there, like a ghost leaving a party for the living. In the car, I stared at my reflection in the rearview mirror. Who was she? This woman with tired eyes and lipstick too red for her age. Then I whispered to her, they don't know what's coming. Because the thing about being forgotten is this. No one expects you to fight back. And when you do, they never see it coming. A few weeks after the wedding, he showed up at my door with a smile too clean to be honest. My daughter wasn't with him. He carried a small bag with groceries and a box of herbal tea I never drank. Thought you could use some help, he said. I stood at the doorway, unsure whether to invite him in. But politeness is a hard habit to kill, especially after 72 years of being taught to swallow discomfort. So I stepped aside. Thank you, I muttered. He walked in like he'd been there 100 times. Looked around, noticed everything. The framed photos, the dust on the shelves, the box of pills beside the TV. You living here all by yourself? He asked, with a tilt in his voice that made my stomach twist. Must get lonely sometimes. I smiled, soft and unreadable. Sometimes silence is peaceful, I replied. He chuckled, but I could see the calculation in his eyes. He wasn't here for small talk. We sat at the kitchen table. He placed the bag down, then slid a manila envelope toward me. "Just some documents," he said casually. "I've been talking to Maria, and we both worry about you. We think it's time to organize a few things. Power of attorney, emergency contacts, that sort of stuff." His voice was smooth, persuasive, almost sweet, but I didn't move. I kept my hands folded in my lap. "I didn't ask for help," I said. He leaned back in the chair, unfazed. "Sometimes help needs to find you." That phrase stuck in my mind. Help needs to find you, like a hunter finds prey. I nodded politely, but I didn't touch the envelope. He continued, "We're just thinking ahead. You're getting older. Things happen. It's good to be prepared." I could feel the pressure in his words, the unspoken urgency, the way he slipped "we" into every sentence, as if my daughter agreed with every step he took, as if I was being outnumbered in my own life. Before he left, he asked if he could check my medications, just in case. "Anything's expired," I declined. "I've got it under control." His smile didn't reach his eyes this time. "Okay, I just worry, that's all." I closed the door behind him slowly, then locked it, then bolted it. My heart was steady, but my breath wasn't. I walked straight to my husband's desk, the one I hadn't opened since his funeral. That envelope was still there, still sealed, still waiting. Over the next few days, he called often, too often, always polite, always helpful. "Need me to pick up anything? Want help scheduling your doctor?" Each offer came wrapped in silk and sugar, but the core was bitter, controlling. One night, Maria called and mentioned casually, "You know, Daniel thinks we should help manage your bills, just to lighten your load." I bit my lip so hard it bled. "I've managed just fine for decades," I said. She laughed. "I know, Mom, but things are different now." Yes, different. She used to call for advice. Now she called to relay instructions. I began writing everything down. Dates, phrases, his tone, her silence. I documented each call in a small leather journal, the one my husband once used to track rent payments from tenants. "Never trust memory alone," he used to say. "Write things down while they're fresh. Paper doesn't forget." He was right. 2 weeks later, he returned, with coffee. He knew I didn't drink coffee. Just thought I'd swing by. This time, he didn't bring papers. He brought a smile that tried too hard. Sat down without being. Invited. "You ever think about moving into assisted living?" My fingers curled slightly around my teacup. "Why?" I asked. "Just thinking about safety, security. We could visit often. You'd have help nearby." I stared at him. "You mean I'd be supervised?" He laughed, but it sounded forced. No, I mean cared for." I leaned in slightly. "There's a difference, Daniel, between being cared for and being controlled." That made his eye twitch, a micro-expression. He stood abruptly. "I'll come by next week. Think about it." Then he left. No goodbye. No hug. Just the sound of his car engine roaring too loud for a residential street. That night, I opened the sealed envelope. Inside were copies of deeds, account statements, and a letter from my husband. It wasn't long, but it said everything. "If they come for you with smiles, don't smile back. Use what I left. You are not alone." I cried, not because I was afraid, but because he knew. Somehow, even in death, he saw this coming. He had left me a net when I didn't even know I was falling. I spent the next month gathering strength, meeting with the lawyer listed in the folder, updating my will, making photocopies. I bought a voice recorder and hid it in a brooch I used to wear only on Sundays. I wore it daily now. Every time Daniel came over, every word he said, every suggestion, every thinly veiled threat, it was all captured, all documented. He started getting more direct. "Think about signing the property over," he said one afternoon. "That way things won't get complicated later." I played dumb. "Oh, I wouldn't know how to do that." He smiled. "I could walk you through it." I smiled back. "That's very kind." But inside, I was memorizing the date. 3:46 p.m. I added it to the journal. I transcribed the recording that night. The lawyer I hired said I had enough for a case already, but I wasn't ready yet. I needed the full picture. I wanted to see just how far he'd go. He began bringing others. A man named Peter, an old friend, from law school, he claimed. They came together with folders and fake forms. "This just confirms your wishes," they said. I nodded, eyes wide. Played the sweet old woman role so well that even I almost believed it. They didn't know I had already traced Peter's name to a fraud case in another state. They didn't know my lawyer had cameras installed. They didn't know that while I smiled and nodded, I was burying them slowly. One signature, one recording, one lie at a time. They had underestimated me from the start, because I walk slowly, because my hands tremble, because my voice sometimes fades. But my mind was sharper than ever, and my resolve, unshakable. I wasn't planning revenge. I was preparing justice, because what they were doing wasn't just manipulation. It was a crime, and I wasn't going to die quietly, so someone else could live comfortably off my silence. It started with a feeling I couldn't explain, something in my chest that wouldn't settle, a tension I had ignored for too long. The moment Daniel handed me that first envelope, something old inside me woke up. Not fear, something older than Meadow. Catella. My husband used to call it a woman's antenna. He said I had the sharpest one he'd ever known. You feel the storm before anyone sees the clouds, he'd joke. That voice echoed now as I stood alone in my room, envelope untouched, eyes wide open. I wasn't ready to fight. Not yet. But I was ready to remember. My room became a sanctuary of strategy. I stopped, watching TV, and started listening to the walls. What had I missed before? What had I accepted as just aging that was actually intuition being silenced? I started walking through the house differently. I traced old memories with my fingers, doorways where Maria once held my hand, drawers where my husband hid notes for me on birthdays. I found one, buried beneath linen. It was yellowed and torn. In case they stop looking at you, look at yourself. You'll still be there. I pressed it to my heart. Down in the basement, I faced the cabinet. It hadn't been touched since the day of the funeral. Dust had blanketed it like snow on a grave. I opened it slowly. The hinges creaked in protest. There, behind boxes of forgotten winter clothes, was the steel box my husband said to never throw out. I had ignored it. Part of me feared it would make him feel truly gone. But now, I needed him more than ever. My fingers found the old combination dial. It took me 3 tries, but it opened. Inside, documents, legal folders, and a sealed envelope labeled, "If she ever doubts herself." I opened the envelope. His handwriting was uneven. Maybe he wrote it when he was already sick. If she ever doubts herself, remind her she survived everything without applause. I wept. Not quietly, not delicately. I wept like a woman breaking, but I was not breaking. I was shedding decades de silencios. Every insult that came wrapped in care. Every meal I served to people who didn't say thank you. Every time I was told I was overreacting. That letter wasn't just from him. It was from the version of me I buried to keep others comfortable. I started waking up earlier, before the sun. I made tea and reviewed the contents of the folder by candlelight. Legal deeds, banking information, letters from his old lawyer, contact numbers, and most importantly, copies of property transfers and powers of attorney that protected everything in my name. I had always thought my husband was cautious. I now realized he had been prophetic. One line in a letter to his lawyer read, "If she is ever coerced, here's the fallback plan." He knew the world, and he knew the way it treated women who aged without money or male protection. I bought a new notebook, leather-bound, thick pages. I started logging everything. Times Daniel visited, what he said, how long he stayed, how many times he used the word protect. He used it a lot. It wasn't a word of safety. It was a warning. We just want to protect you. This is for your protection. No one wants you unprotected. Protection from what? From myself? From my own mind? I logged every sentence. My handwriting became steadier with each page. My mind clearer. Then came the voice recorder. I bought it online. It came shaped like a brooch, silver and old-fashioned, like something my grandmother would have worn. Perfect. I practiced how to press the recording button without looking. Practiced smiling while being studied. Daniel never suspected. Why? Would he? I was just an old woman who forgot things, who sometimes asked him to repeat himself. Say that again? I'd say sweetly, and he'd lean in, slow and clear. Every word, captured. Every lie, saved. Every manipulation, documented. I created 3 folders. One for my lawyer, one for the bank, and one for Maria. That last one hurt the most. I didn't know if she'd ever read it. I didn't know if she would choose me over him, but I had to prepare. I included photos, copies of messages, and even the voicemail she left 2 weeks ago. Daniel's worried about you. He says you seemed confused again. Confused? For staying quiet? For not letting him rearrange my drawers and look through my mail? I played that message 10 times. Not because I didn't understand it, because I did. My lawyer, Mr. Rocha, became my accomplice. He was old school. No emails. All communication in person or by courier. He looked me in the eye and said, "You've got enough already. We can go to the authorities." But I wasn't done. I wanted more. Not for revenge. For proof. For every woman who was ever called crazy for protecting what was hers. For every mother erased from her child's heart by a smile in a suit. I wanted the whole thing. I wanted Daniel to feel just as powerless as he tried to make me feel. I installed small cameras. Nothing fancy. One in the kitchen light fixture. One in the living room clock. I studied the angles, tested the recordings. Every time Daniel visited, I offered him tea. Sat him. At the same spot. I asked questions. What would happen to the house if I passed? Do you think Maria would be okay if I left her out of the will? He answered every time, trying to stay careful. But people reveal themselves when they believe they're winning. He started suggesting things. We could accidentally misplace a document. No one would question it if it came from you. At night, I lit a candle for my husband, sat beside his old slippers and talked to him. I imagined him listening, nodding, proud. "I'm doing it," I'd whisper. "I'm building the trap." I prayed too, not for vengeance, for clarity, for strength, for the courage to keep pretending I was still weak, because that was the hardest part, playing the fool, letting Daniel think he was ahead, smiling when he lied, laughing when he patronized me. Inside, I wanted to scream, but I knew this was my armor. Silence was my sword. Maria visited less and less, always with an excuse. "Daniel has meetings. We're remodeling the kitchen." But I knew she was slipping further into his world. His words came out of her mouth. "Maybe we should take over your finances, Mom." I nodded. Maybe. But I wrote that down too. I created a timeline. I highlighted patterns, the emotional distancing, the triangulation, the false concern. I labeled it all. My journal became a map, a blueprint of how predators isolate their victims. And I wasn't lost anymore. I was charting my way out. Then came the moment I knew he was ready to strike. He brought a pen, a beautiful fountain pen, to sign the new will, he said gently. I told him I needed time. He smiled like a father indulging a slow child. "Of course, take your time." But his eyes were tightening, his hands twitching. He was running out of patience. I could feel it, and that meant it was almost time, because while he was circling me like a vulture, I was becoming the storm. It was a Tuesday afternoon when I decided the time had come. The sky was overcast, and the kind of cold that makes your bones whisper warnings filled the air. I opened the windows just enough to let that bite inside. I wanted the house to feel colder than usual, subtly uncomfortable. Vulnerability begins in the atmosphere, and I needed Daniel to think I was slipping, weakening. I set the table in the living room with tea and dry biscuits. I left a folder slightly askew, filled with papers he wouldn't recognize. Bait, real enough to entice, useless enough to distract. When he arrived, he was smiling, that kind of fake joy people use when they think they've already won. He brought wine again, always wine, and a gift bag with hand lotion. "Lavender, for your hands," he said. "Thought you'd like something calming." I took the bottle, nodded. "Thank you." I didn't say more. I let the silence hang heavy between us. He looked around the room, noticed the open window. "A bit chilly in here, isn't it?" I looked at the sky. "I don't mind. Sometimes the cold reminds me I'm still alive." He laughed, but it cracked slightly. The air was different now. I was different now. He sat down at the table and poured 2 glasses of wine without asking. I noticed he filled mine slightly more than his. "You haven't eaten yet?" he asked. "I could make you something." I smiled softly. "No need. I haven't had much of an appetite." He tilted his head, studying me. "You look tired." That was his first attempt, the seed of doubt. I nodded. "Some days are heavier than others." His eyes lit up, just a little. "You know, that's what Maria and I have been talking about. helping with things. Finances, the will, just simplifying your life. I reached for the tea instead of the wine. I know, and I've been thinking. I let that hang. He leaned forward slightly. Yeah? I nodded. Maybe it's time. I can't keep track of everything. There's so much paperwork, and I don't want to be a burden. He smiled, finally, fully, like a fox in the henhouse. You're not a burden. You're just overwhelmed. That's why we're here. I pulled a folder from the cabinet near me. There's some papers here. Maybe you can help me understand them. He took the folder eagerly. Didn't realize that everything inside was already duplicated and stored. That he was touching evidence, not opportunity. He flipped through the pages, explaining things like, I didn't know how to read. I played along. I leaned in too close, pretended not to understand. So, this part, what does that mean? I asked. He circled something with his finger. That's just boilerplate. You don't need to worry about it. I nodded. And if I sign this, it helps you help me? He smiled. Exactly. It gives us the legal ability to make sure you're safe, your bills paid, your assets protected. That word again. Protected. I wanted to scream. Instead, I poured more tea. He pulled out a new set of documents. Sleek, neatly bound. Already tabbed where he wanted me to sign. This is a cleaner version, he said. Takes care of everything. Held the pen he handed me. His fancy fountain pen. It was heavier than it looked. I let my hand shake slightly. Sometimes I feel so useless, I whispered. He softened his voice. You're not. We're just trying to do what's best for you. I stared at the paper. My eyes didn't blur. My vision was perfect. But I let him think I was confused. Should I read it all? I asked. He hesitated. I mean, you can, but it's just legal speak. I've gone over it with Maria. That was the second mistake. He named my daughter as a conspirator. My daughter, who still hadn't called in over a week, who had stopped answering when I said I was thinking about things. I looked at him and whispered, Do you think Maria would be okay if I changed my mind later? He paused. It's better if we handle it now, before anything gets complicated. There it was. Pressure wrapped in sweetness. Manipulation served with tea. I signed. Slowly, shakily, deliberately, and the brooch I wore, heavy and cold against my chest, recorded every syllable, every breath, every satisfied sigh that escaped him as I finished each signature. Thank you, he said. This really means a lot to us. I nodded, placing the pen down. I just want what's best for everyone. He packed the documents carefully, stood up, and gave me a brief hug. It was the first time he had ever touched me in any way resembling affection. We'll get all of this filed. You'll feel so much lighter, he said. And with that, he was gone. I waited. 23 minutes. Long enough for him to feel safe, for him to believe the trap was closed around me. Then I opened the safe in my closet, took the duplicate copy of what I had just signed, cross-referenced it with the originals my lawyer and I had prepared. The differences were minimal, but damning. He had altered several clauses, redirected power of attorney, shifted asset access, removed specific protections. It was subtle. Legal theft always is. I emailed Mr. Rocha. The subject line was, simple. It's done. Within an hour, he called the district attorney's office. The audio files were uploaded to a secure server. The footage from the cameras? Sent. The journal? Photographed and logged. The net was closing, but not around me. Not on my door, but on his. Daniel opened it thinking it was a delivery. He was still smiling, still confident. But instead of flowers or wine bottles, he found 2 federal agents on his porch. Their jackets were plain, but the eyes weren't. Those men had the gaze of people who had seen too many liars try to stay calm. He stepped back, still holding his coffee mug, and asked, Is there a problem? One of them said, We just have a few questions. And that's where the unraveling began. I wasn't there to witness it, of course, but I had imagined that moment 100 times. The way he'd hesitate, the way his wife, my daughter, would come down the stairs in her robe, still sleepy, only to see the truth written on his face. For weeks he had been so careful, so smug. And now, the truth was out of his hands. They took his phone, his laptop, his briefcase. Every folder he had ever hidden was now in evidence bags. Every password was now a breadcrumb in a case far bigger than he thought. Back in my house, I was making tea, calm, present. The wind outside shook the trees, but inside, everything was still. Mr. Rocha had already called me earlier that morning. "They've moved," he said. "FBI is involved now. It's official." My hands trembled. Not with fear, but with something older. Justice. It doesn't always come with fury. Sometimes it arrives in silence, in slow, steady steps. I looked at the brooch still sitting on the dresser. "You did well," I whispered. The investigation moved fast, faster than anyone expected. It turned out Daniel hadn't been working alone. There were others. His uncle, a man I had met once at a dinner who spoke too loudly and drank too much, was involved in forging documents and laundering money through fake elderly care consulting firms. Peter, his friend, was the front man in multiple schemes targeting widows with inherited assets. They had built an empire of silence, manipulation, gaslighting, all hidden behind birthday cards and check-in calls. But what they hadn't accounted for was me. They underestimated the woman who watched everything and said nothing, who smiled while collecting evidence, who let them think she was weak, and that was their undoing. Every word they spoke in my house, every glass of wine, every offer of help, recorded, archived, cross-referenced. I didn't just tell my story. I documented it like a historian chronicling the rise and fall of an empire. And now, it was falling. Maria called me 2 days after Daniel's arrest. She was crying. "Mom, what's going on?" They said Daniel's in custody, that there's some kind of investigation. Her voice cracked. I could hear the panic, the confusion. She wasn't just afraid. She was waking up. The spell was breaking. But I didn't answer right away. I let the silence sit there, because sometimes silence says what words can't. She repeated louder this time. "Mom," I finally spoke. "I warned you, Maria. I tried." She sobbed. "You should have told me." I cut her off. "I did, in my way. But you weren't listening. You were too busy letting someone else speak for you." There was a pause, then a whisper. "Did he hurt you?" I closed my eyes. "Not physically, but yes. He tried to erase me. That's a kind of violence, too." We spoke for over an hour. I didn't raise my voice once. I let her feel the weight of it all, like I had felt it. The betrayal, the blindness, the quiet complicity. She admitted he had isolated her from her friends, that he'd taken over her accounts, that she wasn't even sure how much of her life was hers anymore. "I thought he loved me," she whispered, and my heart broke again. "He loved what he thought he could get from you," I said. "And when that ran out, he turned to me." The media picked it up within the week. Elder fraud scheme tied to family investment advisor. They didn't name me, but I recognized the description. An elderly widow played a key role in exposing the operation. My neighbor came over with a casserole. "I don't know if it's you," she said gently, "but if it is, I'm proud of you." I smiled. For the first time, I didn't feel invisible. The first court appearance happened behind closed doors, but the impact rippled like thunder across the city. Daniel stood in a gray suit, but the confidence was gone. The reporters outside described him as stiff, disoriented, and visibly shaken. I watched the footage online. Not for pleasure. There was no joy in this. Only confirmation. For so long, I had doubted my own instincts, had let myself wonder if maybe I was too harsh, too suspicious. But seeing him there, cornered by his own arrogance, wasn't satisfying. It was sobering. Inside the courtroom, prosecutors laid out the foundation of their case, a web of fraud spanning 5 states, dozens of elderly victims, millions in stolen assets, falsified legal documents. Daniel's signature was everywhere, his voice on recordings, his name on shell company filings. What began with a man offering to protect an old woman ended with federal charges and frozen accounts, and me, the woman behind the lace curtains, became the center of it all. Mr. Rocha arranged for me to speak with the lead investigator, a kind man, patient, with gentle eyes. He asked if I was sure I wanted to be involved publicly. "We can shield your identity," he said. I looked at him and asked, "And who would that protect? Me, or the next woman like me who stays silent?" He nodded slowly. "You're brave." I smiled. "I'm old. Brave is just what's left when you've run out of fear." News outlets began contacting Rocha's office. They wanted interviews, statements. I declined most, but agreed to one. A journalist whose mother had been scammed years earlier. "Tell your story, like a grandmother would," she said. Soft, but unforgettable. I spoke not with vengeance, but with clarity. I said things no one wants to hear, that betrayal comes wrapped in love, that abuse doesn't always come with bruises, that silencing a woman begins long before anyone signs a paper. Maria watched the interview. She didn't call after, not immediately, but the following week, she arrived at my doorstep. No makeup, eyes swollen. She stood there for a moment, like a child trying to find her. Mother's scent again. I opened the door, said nothing. She stepped in slowly, like the air itself might collapse around her. We sat in the kitchen, where I had once taught her to make rice pudding. She stared at the tiles. "He lied about everything," she whispered. "About his work, about the house, about me." I waited. "He told me you were getting worse," she said, "that you forgot things, that you'd signed over half the house to a charity accidentally, that you weren't safe to live alone." I nodded. "And you believed him?" Her voice cracked. "I didn't want to, but it was easier. I wanted someone to take care of things. I didn't want to see what was in front of me." I reached across the table, took her hand. "We all ignore what we're not ready to feel." We cried, together, for the first time in years. I didn't forgive her that day. Forgiveness is not a single act. It's a decision we renew every morning after betrayal. But I saw something shift. A daughter returned. Not whole, not yet, but searching. Meanwhile, Daniel was denied bail. Too many flight risks. Too many hidden accounts. The case was growing. Other women began coming forward. Stories poured in. One had been convinced to remortgage her home. Another had given her late husband's pension to a retirement consultant Daniel had referred. They had all believed the same lie, that they were loved, or at least respected. What they got instead was theft, disguised as family. The prosecutors offered me a choice: stay a background witness, or testify in court. Rosha looked at me, concerned. "It could be hard, emotionally. They'll question your memory, your motives. They might try to paint you as confused." I looked him in the eyes. "Let them try." The day I testified, the courtroom was full. I wore a navy blue dress and the brooch, not the one with the recorder, but the original from my 40th anniversary. I walked in slowly, deliberately. Every step said, "I'm not afraid of you." I sat, took the oath, spoke, clearly. I told them about the wine, the pens, the manipulation. I described the night I opened the box for my husband. I read the line aloud. "Only use this when they think they've won." People in the audience gasped. Daniel stared at his hands. I didn't look at him once. When I stepped down, the judge thanked me, quietly, respectfully. And I knew, even if nothing else changed, something had already shifted. I had made the invisible visible. I had turned silence into testimony. After the trial, I returned home to a letter from one of the other victims. "You saved me," she wrote. "I thought I was just getting old. I thought I was the problem. But you made me believe my mind again." I placed that letter beside my husband's. 2 voices. One beginning, one end. Both proof of my worth. After the trial, Maria stayed at my house for 3 days. Not because she had nowhere else to go. Her home still stood. Her life still technically intact. But because something inside her had collapsed. Not just the marriage. Not just the illusion. Something deeper. The belief that she had always known better. That she could always trust her own judgment. That blind love would be enough to protect her from the consequences of trusting a predator. On the first night, she slept in her old room, in the same bed I had kept made all those years, just in case. Like some part of me had known she'd return, not as a daughter with news, but as a woman looking for refuge. She didn't say much the first day, mostly silence, long glances, occasional sighs that sounded more like confessions. I didn't push. I made soup. I turned off the TV. I let the quiet wrap around us like an old quilt. It wasn't peace yet, but it was no longer war. We sat at the kitchen table, the same place where she once did her homework, where she once painted birthday cards for her father. The silence between us wasn't empty. It was rebuilding. On the second day, she asked to see the files, not just the legal ones, the letters, the journals, the recordings, everything. "I need to know what I missed," she said, her voice low. "What I chose not to see." I hesitated, not because I wanted to protect her, but because I knew how painful it would be. But I nodded. I opened the drawer, handed her the thick leather journal, the flash drive, the folder with his handwriting. She read in silence for hours. No tears. Just the kind of stillness that only comes when someone's heart is breaking from the inside out. That night, she sat on the edge of my bed. I was cruel, she whispered. Not just distant, not just distracted. Cruel. I looked at her, saw the girl inside the grown woman. Yes, I said softly. You were. She broke down then, completely. No more pretending. No more excuses. I let him speak for me. I stopped hearing your voice. I let him convince me you were fading. I touched her hand. You weren't the first to be manipulated by love. You won't be the last. But now you see it. And that means something. We didn't call it forgiveness. That word felt too clean, too light. What we had was something else. A painful, honest recognition. A shared grief for the years lost. The birthdays missed. The phone calls that never came. But also a willingness to start again. Not as mother and child, but as women who had both been tricked into silence. On the third day, she made breakfast. It was burnt. The eggs were rubbery, the coffee too strong. But she served it with a smile so small and fragile that it nearly undid me. You cooked for me for decades, she said. I figured I could try once. We ate together. The bitterness in the coffee felt fitting. He'll be sentenced next month, she said, looking at her cup. They said it might be 15 years, maybe more. I nodded. Good. We didn't cheer. We didn't gloat. Justice doesn't taste like victory. It tastes like quiet relief. She asked if she could stay longer. Not forever, she said. Just until I figure out who I am without him. I looked at her. You're still someone's daughter. That's a start. The sentencing came on a rainy Thursday. Maria and I sat together on the last bench of the courtroom. Not because we had to, but because we chose to. Not as mother and daughter marked by betrayal, but as witnesses, as survivors. The air in the room was heavy. Lawyers shuffled papers. Cameras weren't allowed inside, but the hallway outside buzzed with journalists. Everyone wanted to hear the final chapter, but I already knew. Justice doesn't end in a gavel strike. It lingers in how people remember, and in how they change. Daniel stood there, flanked by his attorneys. He looked smaller than ever, not physically, but the arrogance that once filled every corner of his presence was gone. Deflated, drained. The judge read the charges slowly, deliberately. Wire fraud, elder exploitation, conspiracy, forgery, abuse of power of attorney. The list went on. As each word dropped, I felt not satisfaction, but a kind of holy exhaustion, like watching a storm finally pass after years of holding your breath. The prosecutor gave a brief summary. The defendant used charm, manipulation, and emotional control to isolate and exploit older women, his own family included. What makes this case different is not only the scale of the fraud, but the bravery of the woman who exposed it. Heads turned toward me. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I kept my hands folded in my lap. That moment wasn't mine alone. It belonged to every woman who had ever been. Dismissed with a pat on the hand and called paranoid, Daniel was sentenced to 22 years in federal prison. No possibility of parole before serving at least 18. He didn't look back at us, didn't speak. His lawyers said he regretted his actions. I didn't need to hear that. Some things you don't say for forgiveness. Some silences you serve like time. Outside, the cameras were waiting. I had prepared a short statement. Just a few lines. My voice trembled, but I held the paper tight. For too long, women like me have been told that we're imagining things, that we're too old to understand, too emotional to trust. Today, we proved that silence is not weakness, that memory is resistance, and that justice belongs to those who don't stop watching. A few reporters clapped. One cried. Maria stood beside me, silent, hands clasped behind her back. That evening, my phone rang nonstop. Messages from strangers, from women across the country. You gave me strength. I thought I was alone. I believed I was crazy. But now I know. I was right to question it. Each message felt like a pebble in a pond, sending ripples I could never have predicted. My story was theirs. Their stories, mine. We had never met, but we had all lived the same silence. A senator's aide reached out a week later. We're drafting legislation to strengthen protections for elderly victims of family-based fraud, she said. Would you be willing to testify? I hesitated. I wasn't a politician. I was a widow, with a journal and a brooch. But then I thought of the women who never got to speak, who died wondering if anyone would ever believe them. Yes, I said. Tell me where to go. Maria started joining me on walks again. Sometimes we didn't speak. Other times, she asked questions. How did you know? When did you start doubting him? I answered honestly. It wasn't one moment. It was dozens of tiny ones. The way he explained things I already knew. The way you stopped laughing when he entered the room. She nodded. He made me feel safe. I squeezed her hand. Sometimes safety is just silence in disguise. We both still had healing to do, but now we were doing it side by side. It began with letters, not emails, not text messages, handwritten letters, folded carefully, some on old floral stationery, others on notebook paper, even a few in trembling cursive barely legible. They came from women I had never met, some addressed to the brave lady, others simply to Iratzi, a name they didn't know, but somehow recognized. One letter read, I watched your interview on the news. I cried for 2 days, because for 20 years, I thought it was my fault. Another said, I gave my son power of attorney because he said I was forgetting things. He sold my car 2 months later. The stories weren't the same, but the silence was. So many of them had spent decades wondering if they were exaggerating, if the disrespect they felt from their children was just generational differences, if the subtle theft of money, space, dignity was just part of growing old. They had doubted their own memories, their own intuition, because when you're called delirante, senile, or confusa enough times, something inside you starts to fade, not because it's true, but because it's exhausting to keep defending what you feel. I read every letter, some more than once, some out loud, some with tears running down my cheeks and pooling on the kitchen table. I answered everyone, even if it was just a postcard that said, You are not crazy, you are not alone. I believe you. And slowly, something beautiful began to grow. Not just a network, but a sisterhood. A resistance of women who had been overlooked, underestimated, and overruled, and who were finally speaking. I suggested we meet. Just once. Just a small group. In a community center near the park. I thought maybe 5 or 6 would come. 19 women showed up. Some came with walkers. Some with printed copies of court papers. Some just with shaking hands and brave eyes. One woman brought her wedding album. Another, her medical records, detailing years of confusion caused by overmedication from a manipulative caregiver. We sat in a circle. No microphones, no agenda, just stories. And silence, respected, not feared. I spoke last. I'm not here to lead anything, I said. I just don't want to die thinking I was wrong to fight. One woman stood up. You weren't wrong. You were just early. That phrase stuck with me. Early. Not wrong. Just ahead of the moment when other women found the courage to believe themselves again. That meeting turned into 2, then 3. We created a name, Vozes da Ultima Pagina, because we were always pushed to the back. And now, we were moving to the front. Maria came to the 4th meeting. She didn't speak at first. She sat beside me, took notes, listened. Afterwards, she hugged one of the women who had shared a story almost identical to hers. He isolated me too, the woman had said. He made me think I had to choose him or my mother, so I chose silence. Maria said later that night, I think I was angry at you because you made me feel too much, and he made me feel nothing. Nothing was easier. I touched her face. Easy doesn't mean right. She nodded, but it felt like survival. We started hosting workshops, with lawyers, with therapists, with older women teaching younger ones how to read contracts, how to set boundaries, how to listen to that voice that says this isn't love, it's control. We weren't trying to punish anyone. We were trying to prevent more pain. Prevention doesn't make headlines, but it saves lives. One woman said, This is the first time someone listened to me without waiting for me to forget what I just said. We all cried that day. The press caught on again. This time they didn't call me a brave widow. They called me a founder, a voice, an advocate. I laughed when I read it. I was still the same woman who burned rice last week and forgot where I left my glasses. But something had shifted. Not outside. In me. I had stopped apologizing for my clarity, for my strength, for my voice. And in doing so, I had helped others find theirs. Voces da Ultima Pagina opened a small office, a converted room behind a church. We had a phone line, a donated printer, a wooden plaque on the door. Every Friday we served coffee and heard new stories. Some of them ended in court. Others ended in confrontation. Many just ended in a long, tight hug. And the words, "Thank you for believing me." No one left untouched. I still cried. Often. Not from pain. From witnessing healing. From watching a 70-year-old woman say, "I'm going to get my bank account back." From hearing a daughter whisper to her mother, "I see you now." From knowing that what began with a betrayal had become a bridge, and I walked across it every week, with women who had once been silent, but never again. They invited me to speak at a national conference on elder rights. At first, I hesitated. Not out of fear. I had already walked through fire, but because I didn't want the spotlight. I wasn't interested in applause. I had no desire to be called a hero. But then I thought about the letters, the trembling voices, the women who came to me whispering, "You told my story." And I realized this wasn't about me anymore. It never had been. It was about all of us. All the women who had been slowly erased from their own lives. So I accepted. The auditorium was full. Mostly women. Some in wheelchairs, others in sharp suits. A few younger faces, daughters, granddaughters, caregivers. The organizers handed me a microphone. My name was on a banner behind me. Iratzi Almeida, advocate, survivor, founder. I looked at it for a long second, then at the people, and then I spoke. My name is Iratzi. I am 73 years old. I am a widow, a mother, a woman who was told that her voice was fading, but whose memory was louder than anyone expected. The room was silent. I'm not here to tell you about laws. I'm here to tell you about how it feels when your own daughter stops hearing you. When someone you welcomed into your family treats your home like a target. When your mind is still clear, but everyone insists you're confused because it makes it easier for them to control what you built. I paused. But I'm also here to tell you this. We are not weak. We are not invisible. We are not done. When I stepped off that stage, something shifted. The audience didn't just applaud. They stood. And in that moment, I saw it. We were building something. Not just resistance. Not just awareness. We were building a new kind of old age. One where silence wasn't the price of survival. One where dignity wasn't a memory. It was a standard. After the conference, things moved quickly. Our group, Voices from the Last Page, received new donations. Lawyers volunteered. Retired judges offered guidance. Social workers reached out to train our team. What had started in the back room of a church was now a registered nonprofit with regional chapters. I had no experience running an organization, but I had lived through enough to know what mattered. Listening, documenting, protecting. We opened a helpline, staffed by volunteers, most of them over 60. Our rule was simple. Every call gets answered by someone who understands. No scripts, no rush, just real people saying, "Tell me your story. I'm here." Some calls lasted 10 minutes. Others took hours. One woman called every Wednesday at 3 p.m. just to read poetry she wrote about her loneliness. We never told her to stop. The movement spread. A group of teachers in the South started a project in schools, using our materials to teach children how to honor the wisdom of elders. A nurse in another state began a training for caregivers to detect signs of quiet financial abuse. A mayor invited us to speak at City Hall after his own mother shared her story. Little by little, shame was being replaced by voice. Maria became our community outreach coordinator. She still struggled sometimes. Regret doesn't vanish. It hums in the background. But she used that hum as a compass. She created workshops for daughters and sons who didn't know how to reconnect after the damage. "I failed to listen to my mother," she said in one session, "and I'll spend the rest of my life helping others listen better." Some cried. Some walked out. But the ones who stayed changed. As for me, I was invited to testify before a congressional committee, not in secret, not behind closed doors. This time they wanted my name, my voice, my story on record. I wore my best dress, the one I kept in the back of the closet for funerals, never imagining I'd wear it to fight for the living. I stood before a room full of people in suits and said, "When we protect the elderly, we're not just protecting assets. We're protecting memory, identity, truth." One senator, an older woman herself, looked at me with tears in her eyes. You've done more with your pain than most do with power, she said. After that, they passed what they called the Arasi Act, a set of protections for seniors in cases of coercive control and deceptive legal manipulation. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start I never imagined would carry my name. And still, I came home every night to my little house, my kitchen, my tea, the quiet, the place where it all began. I still wore the brooch. I still kept the folder safe, not because I needed it anymore, but because it reminded me of what it means to believe yourself when no one else will. Sometimes women come to visit. They bring cookies, old letters, questions. They sit at my table and ask, "How did you stay calm?" And I tell them the truth. I didn't. I cried in the dark. I whispered to my dead husband. I prayed for a sign. But when the time came to act, I didn't let their doubt become my silence. And if you're reading this now, wondering if you still matter, let me be the one to answer. Yes, you do. You are not too late. You are not too old. You are not delusional. You are the last voice some people expected to hear, and the most important one they ever will.